So hello and welcome to my presentation, Teaching and Learning the Baroque Lute in the 21st Century. I must begin by telling you that I am in complete awe of the teaching process. To me, it has been a miraculous experience to guide students through the course of their studies and to watch them blossom and flourish as professional musicians and teachers. And in particular, in the area of early music, I feel responsibility to guide the students to a high-level performance and an understanding of historical context. Additionally, I feel a responsibility to keep abreast of developments in modern research related to any subject that might help in our quest for excellence. And this involves a fundamental understanding of body mechanics and the mental processes which enable us to learn and perform at a high level. To get to the subject at hand, I will summarize my approach to teaching the Baroque Lute, which has led to the publication by Le Lute d'Oreille of my new tutor, intended for those with previous experience on lute family instruments or the classical guitar. Teaching the Baroque Lute, and I put it in quotation marks, in the 21st century is a great challenge, for we are attempting to bring a tradition into the modern era that was veiled in secrecy, hinted at in treatises, and frequently passed on from teacher to student, if at all. This secretiveness of lute masters is described in the Mary Burrell Lute book from the mid-17th century, where it is written that the masters never write the lessons as they must be played. Thomas Mace in 1676 claims that the lute's reputation for being very difficult to play is to a large degree because of the closeness of masters in the art who all along have been extremely shy in revealing the occult and hidden secrets of the lute. The masters die, and all of their experience and skill die with them. Mace goes then into great detail regarding learning the 17th century instrument in a matter foreshadowing modern pedagogy. Many early lute students would have received training in singing, composition, and improvisation. Lutenists additionally would probably have received instruction from lute teachers, most likely receiving lessons more frequently than do students today. In the Burrell Lute book, it is written, "I would not have a beginner play in the absence of his master. Therefore, the master must come to the scholar as often as he can, at least once a day." There are various books of lute music which include some playing instructions. These books give us valuable insights into the priorities of the time, but besides Mace, none are actually tutors for learning to play the instrument. As I write in the introduction to my new tutor, which well reflects my teaching philosophy, today more and more lutenists wish to perform 17th and 18th century music in an expressive manner, reflecting stylistic practices of that era. Additionally, many are aspiring to play in a healthy, balanced, and efficient manner based on psychological and physiological research. The purpose of the present tutor is to help them discover and develop essential tools for achieving these goals. I will now share with you some ideas about learning the Baroque Lute in the 21st century. I have some misgivings about using the designation Baroque Lute, or Baroque Lute, as some people may pronounce it, for it is a modern term used to distinguish lutes of various time periods from another. A more appropriate designation, albeit longer, would be 11-course or 13-course lute in D minor tuning. My approach is based on hints in 17th and 18th century lute writings, treatises on other instruments, general music priorities and practices from the time, as well as modern research into physiology, psychology, learning processes, sports, neurology, and philosophy. I feel that it is essential that lute students, and by that designation, I certainly include myself, be versed in historical performance practice with emphasis on rhetorical expression. Well, that's too far. Section 1 of my book is called Background Material, which includes chapters on these topics. As a teacher, I feel it is my responsibility to include as much rhetorical information as possible in my lessons to give a framework to the specific interpretive suggestions that I make. This is, for me, fundamental information which provides historical context for the music to be played. My hope is that this section encourages the player to recognize the primacy of rhetoric and rhetorical tools, and quotations from the 16th through 18th centuries are given regarding rhetorical playing. For the primary purpose of musical performance in the Baroque era was to stir the passions of the listener, with rhetoric as the primary tool. I emphasize that the idea of rhetorical expression is often the opposite of the 20th century concept of evenness, consistency, and regularity in playing. Quite the contrary. It is often the unevenness and irregularity that touches people. For example, in rhythmic variety, articulation, and dynamic. Thomas Mace, for example, writes of rhetorical expression in music, comparing the art of playing to the art of oratory, writing that music is as a language and has its significations as words have, if not more strongly. And as in language, so likewise in music, may any humor, conceit, or passion be expressed, and so significantly as any rhetorical words or expressions are able to do. Only, if any difference be, it is in that music speaks so transcendentally and communicates its notions so intelligibly and to the eternal, internal, intellectual, and incomprehensible faculties of the soul, so far beyond all language of words, that I confess and most solemnly affirm, I have been more sensibly, fervently, and zealously captivated and drawn into divine raptures and contemplations by those unexpressible, rhetorical, uncontrollable persuasions and instructions of music's divine language than ever yet I have been by the best verbal rhetoric that came from any man's mouth, either in pulpit or elsewhere. And Ernst Gottlieb Baron in 1727 writes that the practice or execution of music occurs in two ways. The first consists of playing the notes and melody just as they are written on the paper, with no concern for the gallant additions that will press upon the emotions. The other manner of playing is the correct one and can quite properly be called oratory. I call it this because it agrees with the chief goal of rhetoric. If we observe the qualities of a good orator, we will find that his achievement consists of the following: the elegance of his words, the loftiness and merit of his thoughts and subjects, and the persuasion and emotion of the affects. A virtuoso musician must possess all of these qualities. By the stroke, attack, and touch, the right weight is given. Mace puts much emphasis on dynamic play as a rhetorical tool. He writes, "The next is to play some part of the lesson loud and some part soft, which gives much more grace and luster to play than any other grace whatsoever. Therefore, I commend it as a principal and chief ornamental grace in its proper place. You will find it very easy to humor a lesson by playing some sentences loud and others again soft, according as they best please your own fancy. Some very briskly and courageously, and some again gently, lovingly, tenderly, and smoothly." To support dynamic playing in my book, I add suggestions to many pieces in my book, including hairpin markings to indicate the subtle dynamics appropriate to this music. I use hairpin markings as used by Jean-Philippe Rameau in Hippolyte et Aracie, 1733, for crescendo and diminuendo. This is an interesting point because a lot of people today think this type of dynamic marking is a modern or a 19th century invention. Here's Rameau using it. It's also essential to explore the power of consonance and dissonance. The influence of acoustical vibration on our feelings is a common experience, not dependent on knowledge of harmony or of rhetoric's connection to intervals and chords. Baroque music, oriented to the interplay of dissonance and consonance, well reflects the interaction of tension and relaxation we experience in daily life. Thus, the assertion in historical treatises that Baroque music can stir the passions is quite plausible. And since the goal of instrumental play is to emulate singers, it's helpful to follow the advice of Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, who writes, "One should lose no opportunity to hear artistic singing. In doing so, one learns to think in a singing way. It will also be beneficial to sing a musical thought to oneself in order to capture well its correct execution. This will always be greater value than getting such things from thick books or long lectures." Depending on the individual needs of the student, I explore with them some basics regarding anatomy and biomechanics. In my book, these are presented as Introduction to Anatomy and Biomechanics, with chapters exploring movement of tendons, bones, joints, and muscles. Mace had written, "I will suppose you to be a very new beginner. Now, as to this order, first set yourself down against the table in as becoming a posture as you would choose to do for your best reputation. Sit upright and straight, then take up the lute and lay the body of it in your lap across. Let the lower part of it lie upon your right thigh. Lay your left hand down upon the table and your right arm over the lute so that you may set your little finger down upon the belly of the lute, just under the bridge. This is the most becoming, steady, and beneficial posture. The work of the left hand is the most difficult and therefore must have no hindrance or impediment, but must be free. This at first will easily be gained, but afterwards not. And now, supposing you are perfect in your postures, proceed to the striking of a string." These are wise words, just as relevant today as they were then. I would define the main goals of this exploration as freedom of movement and efficiency of movement. As any athlete or dancer knows, freedom and efficiency of movement is necessary to achieve a desired result. Training begins quite young, so that during the developmental phase, a good connection is made between the inner image of the movement and the actual movement itself. Since an excess of thought during movement will inhibit its flow, movement therefore must be an automatic response to the imagery that drives it. As musicians, we can make use of similar imagery and information to help us in our development. There are various definitions of good technique. I would say that technique is the great enabler, and define good technique as the ability to realize that which is in our musical imagination at any given moment. For this, optimizing body use in general and while playing is essential. As stated by Robinson, Mace, and others, being aware of posture is a vital first step in learning to play an instrument. I find efficient body use and ease of play indispensable, and these are emphasized in my work. In other words, Robinson and Mace tell us of the desired result, but modern research helps us to get there. I go into a detailed explanation of flexors, extensors, joints, bones, and muscles with illustrations. For example, these two from David Gorman's The Body Movable. I will now briefly summarize some of these points which are relevant to the learning process. What then is efficiency of movement? It involves using only the necessary amount of muscle contraction for the intended movement. This relates to the concept of relaxation, an important term that is often misunderstood and misused. It is certainly important to play in a relaxed manner, but this only applies to muscle fibers not necessary for the desired movement. Some people naturally use the muscles properly and efficiently. Most people, however, including myself, benefit from knowledge and training. I would also like to point out that although this understanding is part of the process of learning, it needs to become integrated into our subconscious. Flexible and efficient movements are learned and integrated into our nervous system through attention, awareness, and repetition. An essential aspect of good playing is using the muscles that are most appropriate for the desired movement. Some muscles are built for speed and precision, and some muscles are built for speed and precision and are made up of many fast twitch fibers, while others are built for strength. For example, using a large elbow movement to play with the left hand is inefficient because the muscles controlling this are not suitable for delicate movements. That's this here. Additionally, research tells us that the more you flex your wrist, the harder it is to flex the middle joints of the fingers. Therefore, it's best to play with a wrist that is fairly straight or only slightly flexed, as needed. And the fingers are flexed by synergistic movements involving intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. However, the intrinsic hand muscles have a higher fast twitch fiber composition than the extrinsic ones, and should be favored in playing whenever possible. This suggests using the base joints, which are moved primarily by the intrinsic muscles of the hand, over the middle and tip joints, which are moved predominantly by the extrinsic arm muscles. Varied use of the finger joints can also produce a variety of sounds and articulations, and it is valuable to search for different timbres and articulations by varying the flexibility of the finger joints. The main strength of the finger stroke originates in the base joint, whereas the articulation and tone color can be influenced by varying the firmness of the tip joint. These subtleties can help us emulate a vocal, rhetorical style of instrumental playing. One of the primary causes of pain or reduced flexibility is compensation due to the incorrect use of muscles. Since using the wrong muscles reduces the efficiency of our action, we compensate by using muscles that are less suitable, leading to excess tension, fatigue, and associated problems. To play in a healthy, efficient manner conducive to free musical expression, we need to use the weight of the arm and the hand whenever possible, as well as large muscles for strength and support, and small muscles for delicate movement. One of the most important realizations in my studies is that in playing the lute, the fingers themselves don't actively move, but rather are moved. In other words, no muscles on the fingers are involved in the movement. The fingers are moved like levers by the extrinsic muscles in the arm and the intrinsic muscles in the hand. This insight strengthens the conviction that any tension felt in the fingers only serves to inhibit their motion, as opposed to that, they're just levers. Very artistic levers, of course. Muscle fibers can contract and relax only. Movement caused by muscle contraction, like raising the arm towards the sky, can be called an active movement, whereas movement caused by relaxing said muscles, like allowing the weight of the arm to drop, can be called a passive movement. If muscles are in a constant state of overcontraction, they produce lactic acid, causing fatigue and sluggishness. An alteration of active and passive movements greatly increases our endurance and productivity. This is an essential concept for athletes and dancers, and is integrated into the work. The next section in the book, also reflecting my teaching practice, is entitled Preparing to Play, Making the Difficult Seem Easy, which includes chapters on practicing, mental imagery and processing, motor performance and learning, and mental training. I write, the act of playing an instrument is, in an expressive manner, involves multiple layers of mental and physical activity, too complex to completely control through conscious directives from the brain. We therefore need to integrate a balance between conscious and subconscious directives into our practicing, and much of the work involves training the nervous system to respond to our musical imagination. Thus, the more we learn to trust our body to respond to our musical imagination, the closer we come to our goal of physically effortless, expressive playing. Allowing ourselves to be guided by imagery rather than mental directives gives us access to a much wider array of subtlety, and it's easier to multitask. For while the intellect can multitask to a limited extent, our imagery is literally limited only by our imagination. And especially relevant to musicians, studies have shown that performance under automatic processing is far less sensitive to stressors than is performance controlled by mental directives. Getting closer to actually playing the instrument, I feel it's important in the 21st century to discuss the changing right hand position from the 16th through the 18th centuries and its effect on sound, articulation, and expression. I strongly encourage my students to at least try a historically based right hand position with the little finger close to the bridge. Here it is, hopefully, yes. Here is a close-up of Charles Mouton's right hand with the little finger fairly close to the bridge from his favorite, not his favorite, from his famous portrait. But how did it sound? Charles Lepine, a French lutenist who published his complete works in 1627, wrote, Of what does the perfection of lute playing consist? Thirdly, in playing the strings, one makes them sound as clear as those of a spinet, or as if one were to tap a knife, no, as one were to tap a glass with a knife. For me, this is one of the most revealing of historical statements. Considering what a spinet sounds like, or spinet, not sure how it's pronounced in English, and the sound of a knife tapping on a glass, does that represent what we normally hear from a Baroque lute today? The evidence suggests that lutenists in the 17th and 18th centuries equally prioritized clarity and volume as well as sweetness. For the hand was often held fairly close to the bridge, producing a sound that is clearer and sharper than typically used today, with increased possibilities for dynamic and timbre changes, a more articulate sound, and a bass-driven approach. Finally, on page 116 in the book, I begin to explore playing the instrument. When discussing holding the instrument, I write, priority is given to a position that allows support from the back muscles, deep breathing, freedom of movement in the trunk, arm, and hands, an optimized balance between stability and flexibility, so that supporting the instrument does not cause unnecessary body tension. I recommend using a strap and alternating between sitting and standing, but leaning the lute against the edge of a table is also a great solution. For the right hand, we search for a position of alert rest from which to initiate strong and efficient movements. We discuss the advantages after the finger stroke between relaxing the flexor, which means allowing the fingers to return to their natural starting position, or activating the extensors, involving active muscle contraction. So this is a relaxation, that's an active extension. This alternation between the active and the passive movements is essential for efficient and balanced playing. It also is essential for endurance, for if we are constantly flexing and extending the muscles, they have no rest intervals. If we, however, flex and release, there is a continuous interplay between contraction and relaxation. I begin my practical work with an exploration of thumb use. Why is this? Like jazz, much of Baroque music is bass-driven. Many gestures and impulses come from the bass, and it often shares equal importance with the melody in expressive playing. Awareness of it gives insight into rhetorical expression and can lead to phrasing the bass and melody independently to some extent. Imagining, for example, that the bass is played by a cellist and the melody by a violinist. When we start playing the instrument, I encourage my students to start training their body right away to connect movement to the musical imagination. As I write, from the beginning, connect your musical imagination to your kinesthetic imagination. In all the exercise and pieces, have a mental image, including volume and timbre, of the desired note. Let your mental imagery drive the movements. Listen and experience the sound and sensation fully. Reflect on whether the result has met your mental image and make adjustments if necessary. Repeat. More important than what you do is how you do it. Using open string arpeggios and scale-type exercises was not a 19th century invention, for we have some earlier examples that can be integrated into our work. For example, I show you here exercise 9, which is from an early 18th century manuscript in Brussels with original fingering for arpeggios. So up there is my modern transcription of it, and below you see the original manuscript with those arpeggios and those fingerings. Naturally, we must also discuss the use of the left hand. Mace gives advice for the left hand, writing that when you move a finger from the string, let it be so very little from the string as one can scarcely perceive your finger to have unstopped it, which custom will teach you to play close and neat, close and quick, neat and fine. But if, on the contrary, at the first, you use yourself to lift or toss your fingers high, you shall never play handsomely, quick, or well. It is therefore both commendable and profitable to play close, so that in doing much, you seem to take little or no pains. And in doing so, you cannot but do neatly, nimbly, and well. But if in your beginning you get an ill or false habit, you will scarcely ever be reclaimed, which is indeed one main cause of so many bad performers and the lute's discredit. Mace gives us the what, but not the how. This is quite difficult to achieve without tensing the hand in a manner that inhibits movement. A strong, balanced, and efficient left hand requires using the muscles and joints in an optimal manner while supporting these movements from the back. I show a middle index alternation exercise from Mace. And in my exercise 15b, I have added imaginary syllables, as in flute articulation, to aid in our understanding of differentiation in a rhetorical manner. Tiri diri can be understood as follows. The strongest syllables on the good notes are indicated with t. The slightly less strong syllables on the good notes are indicated with d. The weakest syllables, the bad notes, are indicated with ri. So we have tiri diri. Diddle, according to Quantz. At the end, diddle. Diddle, according to Quantz, is used on the quicker notes, which in general should be slightly lighter than the slower notes. Suggestions for dynamics have been added to continue the process of prioritizing dynamic play. Scale-type exercises, both original and excerpted from the 17th and 18th century music, can be a valuable addition to our practice routine. These can be used for enhancing coordination between the hands, increasing efficiency and freedom, as well as developing a higher level of rhetorical expression. These should not be used as purely technical exercises, but rather to develop the above-mentioned musical skills. In his Livre de musique pour le luth, Paris 1679, Perrine gives various scales and tablature and the equivalent in staff notation. He writes, after having practiced all these stepwise notes on the lute for some time as they are, one can use some music book to learn to play all kinds of airs on it. And here is one of the few extant examples of original scale exercises. It is by Matthias Sigismund Bichteler, the successor to Bieber as the court Kapellmeister in Salzburg. The left-hand fingering is original, although dots were used rather than numbers. Also very important is practice routine, or the art of practicing. I write, there's no single practice routine valid for all. On the contrary, an optimal routine reflects the individual's experience, ability, time available, and goals. The ideas in parts 2 and 3 exploring biomechanics and mental training form the foundation for the art of practicing. Repetition of correct movements and musical gesture is essential, and this can be done immediately or randomly, returning to the given passage at a later moment. Following is a summary of basic ideas I find valid for most learners, useful as a general guide, and adaptable to specific needs. Body warm-ups, deep breathing and mental relaxation, brushing exercises on all strings, open string exercises, left-hand exercises including reviewing the minimum necessary tension, improvisation including scale fragments and scales with rhythmic variety, imagination of fragments and complete pieces, playing of fragments and complete pieces, a cool down including slow playing, body stretches, deep breathing, and mental relaxation. The threads tying all of this together are full body awareness, physical balance, minimal tension, quality of sound, and rhetorical expression. It is also essential to take frequent breaks to refresh the body and brain. Right-hand fingering on the D minor tuning is important to explore, and for this it is helpful to look at historical tablatures which include such markings. Printed books typically include few indications, but fortunately there are various manuscripts which include extensive right-hand fingering. To aid in this exploration, I include pieces which include right and left-hand fingering, which may be representative of lute fingering in the second half of the 17th century in France. For example, from the Barbe manuscript from around 1690. I suggest that these fingerings can also be used as a guide to fingering 18th century German and Austrian repertoire, although the ring finger then was used more often in arpeggios in that later time period. And finally, although it is rarely practiced today, the D minor tuning was frequently used for basso continuo, thorough bass, in German-speaking countries in the 18th century. I find it extremely valuable to practice this art on the Baroque lute, for not only does it sound great with German and Austrian chamber music, but it is an unparalleled tool for getting to know the instrument. In this slide, it shows from the book my realization of the rule of the octave in C major. And in the book, I show this in various keys and also other examples. Insight into stylistic thorough bass playing on the D minor tuning can be found, for example, in chamber works by Ernst Gottlieb Baron and Adam Falkenhagen in sections where the lute accompanies the solo instrument. Fascinating historical explorations of basso continuo playing and composition on the lute can be found in manuscripts from the 18th century. For example, in Harrach 120, where there are 15 pages which include continual realizations for the Baroque lute by Matthias Sigsbond-Bichteler. These short examples give a picture of his manner of realization. I hope I have successfully shared with you some of my ideas for teaching the Baroque lute in the 21st century. To summarize the essentials, with this work, the perceived boundaries between technique and interpretation ideally disappear and are replaced by a realization of how our musical imagination can be manifested through optimal body use. The conceptual boundaries between mind and body can disappear, for they are essentially different expressions of our totality. The artificial boundaries between composition and improvisation, between player and instrument, between music maker and music receiver also disappear, and music becomes a magical experience for all, undefined and intangible. A calm center can give access to our deep feelings, just as physical or emotional agitation can block them. Being more connected with our core feelings can connect us to the core feelings of others. And ultimately, it is our imperfections that truly touch people in life and performance. This is, in my view, what rhetorical performance is all about. Thank you. Yes.
I just want to thank you for emphasising the importance of warming down. I think a lot of musicians don't necessarily think about warming up, but they certainly forget about warming down. And to give an example, I've got some friends who do Baroque dance, which is a lot on Tutor. If you warm up properly and do it, and then you warm down properly, you don't end up with sore calves. If you don't warm down, you end up with sore calves. The muscle supply to your calves and your legs is so much bigger than to your hands and forearms, that, it's really, really important.
Yes, I agree. And what we all tend to do, or most of us tend to do, is warm up and then play as long as possible until the alarm rings and then run off and do something else. But if we leave 2 or 3 minutes at the end, I call it cool down, but warm down is maybe a better term. If we leave 2 or 3 minutes to warm down or cool down, it's exactly as you say. It's actually better for us. Also better for us mentally, rather than practicing until 3 and then running off and cooking lunch or teaching or something. Thank you for that, yes.
One more question?
In the pursuit of a really first-class technique, I mean, this is something which is so elusive in so many ways. I know, obviously, reading your book is probably one of the answers you would give to how to achieve that. But is it, in your opinion, simply that those of us who don't achieve that just haven't done enough of the good things?
Wow. That's a great question. I think there are certain genetic predispositions that allow certain people to work with more strength and efficiency. I mean, it's like if I, at 12 years old, wanted to be a skier, it could be that no matter how hard I worked and how well I worked, I wouldn't have achieved that. So I think there's one basic issue, which is a genetic predisposition. But I think most people can reach quite a high level if they practice with enough awareness, efficiency, and enough time. And for that, I would say, what I tell my students, a minimum of 3 hours a day. Because that's what we're trying to train is such delicate, fine motor control that for me, less than 3 hours a day it's almost impossible to achieve. And I think a lot of people could achieve a high level. I have a friend who's a classical guitarist. He's in his late 50s. He's fantastic. He still practices 5 hours a day. But I think time put in, time spent, and how we spend the time would enable people, many more people, to reach a high level, but certainly not everybody because of how we're built. Is that a satisfying answer to the question?
It's pretty satisfying, but there are a lot of players who have really very, very good techniques. But,
Yes.
There's an acoustic guitarist called Clive Carroll that I saw recently. I don't know if you've come across this.
Yeah.
But just sort of jaw-droppingly accurate. I mean, just unbelievably accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of thing that's still really perplexing to me. It's amazing that people play with so much accuracy. There are just a very, very few players
Yes.
who are absolutely flawless, or it seems to me flawless.
Yes, I think if we're talking about the absolute highest level of flawlessness, then I'm sure that has something to do with our genetic predisposition, how our muscles respond to our messages, the quickness of our muscle movements. So that area, I think, most people will never achieve. But the area below of playing really well, then I think many, many people could achieve.
Or do you think they're just more exact about doing little box practices of the difficult bits? To come back to how you practice.
I think it's a mix. It's a mix of things. I have a student, a voice student right now, actually, who was a Wunderkind. She was one of Russia's Wunderkind. What's that in English? A child's genius. Yeah. So at the age of 7, she was performing Chopin, stuff in public performance. And I don't think it's that she practiced more or better than everybody else. There's something that we're born with that allows that extra level. But then you need to have this very, very clear, efficient way of practicing. And these Russian kid pianists were practicing like 6 hours a day and being constantly coached by the teachers. So it's a mixture of these things, I think. But I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so that I really know exactly how these people got to be. I'm fascinated by this student of mine, because she was playing virtuoso Chopin at the age of 7. She doesn't really know how she got there either.
Well, I think we better take the rest of any more questions and discussion over tea, coffee and cake, wine and cake, homemade, delicious homemade cake. Thank you very much. That's